Welcome to the Cloudways API plus Magento 2 integration, full course for developers. In this course, we will deep dive into integrating Cloudways through Cloudways API with Magento 2 to streamline cache management, automate tasks, and enhance your store's performance. We will walk through everything step by step, from setting up API credentials and making authentication requests to implementing custom modules that allow you to control Cloudways directly from the Magento admin panel. Plus, we will write and review real code together so you can follow along and build this integration from scratch. Whether you are a seasoned Magento developer or just looking to expand your skill set, this course has something for you. Make sure to stick around till the end for some advanced tips and best practices to optimize your integration. And if you are looking for expert help with your Magento projects, my company Pronko Consulting specializes in custom development, third-party integrations, and migration services for Magento 2 and Adobe Commerce. Feel free to reach out via email for consultation. Alright, let's get started. Let's start our integration with Cloudways via API by creating the basic module structure. I will start with the namespace of a vendor and name of the module. So namespace is Mage Mastery and module name is Cloudways API. That has to be located inside code directory. Two required files: registration PHP and module XML. Let's start with registration PHP. We have to register our Magento 2 module. By triggering register method and providing required arguments such as type, component name, and location. Next is module XML file. And I would like to copy name from registration and paste it here. So we can register our module in Magento 2 application. I would like to build a new PHP class that is going to be responsible for curl connections or requests that we are going to send when user or admin user clicks a button from Magento admin. For this, I'm going to create a new folder called model HTTP, and inside HTTP I'm going to create a class called curl. This class is going to be responsible for sending API requests via curl to Cloudways server. And for this curl we need a few arguments such as URL, such as method, and by default it's going to be get, such as headers, and data. So it's our body. And as a result, this execute method will be returning an array. Before we continue, let's take a quick moment to talk about Cloudways hosting and why it's an excellent choice for Magento 2 websites. Cloudways offers a powerful and flexible cloud hosting solution optimized for Magento, providing features like dedicated resources, advanced caching mechanisms, and built-in CDN integration to ensure lightning-fast page loads. With their one-click scalability and automated backups, you can easily handle traffic spikes without worrying about downtime. Plus, the intuitive dashboard and seamless API access make it simple to manage your server, deploy new projects, and, as you can see in this course, even integrate custom solutions directly from your Magento admin panel. So if you are looking to boost your store's performance, Cloudways might be just the perfect fit. I will leave a link in the description if you want to check them out. Alright, let's get back to the integration. This method we will implement in the following way. We are going to use curl init. It's PHP function that allows us to connect and get curl handle. And with the curl set opt, we can set various options for our curl connection. We're going to provide an option saying return transfer equals true. We are going to check if we have any headers, and if so, we are going to trigger curl set opt again, and we will set our headers by using HTTP header option, and third argument is going to be an array of headers that we pass into execute method. Next, we will check if we are going to have post method, and if so, we are going to set first of all option post that is true, and secondly curl opt post fields, we are going to send a JSON version of our data. Next, we will call curl exec. This is a PHP function that executes our and sends request and retrieves, provide us a response back. Also, we can use curl get info, a PHP method, in order to get information about our request, in particular HTTP code. And finally, curl close, and we will provide curl handle object. So once we have a response, we need to decode it. So I will call my variable decoded response, and we'll use JSON decode response true. Second argument, it allows us to convert our string into JSON into associative array. Also, we can check JSON last error if it's does not equal none, and if so, we are going to throw new localized exception, something like invalid JSON response from Cloudways API. And also we can check HTTP code. If it's bigger or equal 400, it means that we can throw an exception because something went wrong with our request. Cloudways API request failed with HTTP code. We are going to provide HTTP code. Alright, so once we checked for the errors from whether we have successful request or there is successful response, and if everything is fine, we can go ahead and return decoded response from this method. Real quick, if you are finding this course helpful and want to support this channel, consider joining as a YouTube member or becoming a Patreon supporter. Your support helps me create more in-depth tutorials, cover advanced Magento topics, and keep the content ad-free. Plus, as a member, you will get access to exclusive perks like behind-the-scenes content, priority replies to your comments, and even early access to new videos. You will find the join button right below this video and link to my Patreon in the description. Your support would mean a lot and help keep the channel growing. Thanks so much, and now let's get back to it. Our next step would be creation of a configuration class or config that is going to be responsible for retrieving configuration values from whether it's config.xml file, configuration files that we will create, or from database, from core config data, values that are going to be stored by admin user through system configuration page. So we are going to create a config PHP class that will help us with retrieval of configuration settings. For this, I'm going to use a dependency, private read-only scope config interface. This is going to be a dependency of this config class that will allow us to access configuration values from whether config XML or core config data. And I also going to create a few XML passes for the fields that are required for our integration. So what fields do we need? API key, then email, it's Cloudways email, user email. Then we need server ID, app ID, and API endpoint. So 5 constants that we will use in this config class. So let's prepopulate values of these constants. Cloudways API settings, and here I will just copy paste prefix of all constant values and provide names of fields that we're going to set via system XML configuration file. Server ID, app ID, API endpoint. So once I have these 5 constants, I can go ahead and create public function get API key, string API key. API key equals to this scope config and get value that we're going to use in order to get access to our API key. scope interface. And if we don't have this API key retrieved, I will throw a new exception saying that Cloudways API key is not configured. So when we will be using this getAPI method, it will say us that we are missing some information. And then we can return this API key back. Next method is going to be email, get email. Get email constant. Email. So Cloudways email is the email that we're using when we log in. When we use login page of Cloudways. So this is an email. Email. Next is going to be a server ID. Get server ID. Server ID is not configured. Server ID. Next method is app ID. Get app ID. So it's application identifier that is required for sending a cache clear command. So we also have to provide it through configuration settings. And finally, endpoint. Get API endpoint. Endpoint. We're going to have some default value, so it shouldn't be as much of a problem or exception that we're going to throw. It's just in case admin user will delete completely this API endpoint value from configuration settings. And also let's create a config XML file that will hold some default values for our integration. So under default XML node, let's create Mage Mastery Cloudways API node, then settings, and then a few fields or settings that we're going to use. I'm not going to pre-populate these settings because they are going to be unique. However, there is one setting called API endpoint that we can pre-populate inside the config XML file, and other 4 settings will be just for reference that what are the settings keys that are supported by this extension. For the implementation or API endpoint, here is URL or endpoint that we should be pre-populating to our config XML file. Cloudways API, we can find documentation on developers.cloudways.com. Says the following, that in order to send any request, we have to first, any request, for instance, clearing application cache, clear app cache, we have to send a header access that includes access token, and it's a bearer access token header that we have to send in order to for Cloudways to allow us to perform some operations. So first step and first request that we have to send, it's a post request to retrieve access token or to generate OAuth access token. And in order to do this, we at least have to follow this documentation, and we have to get API key. We have to get access token using the call. So this call, it's a post request. And we have to send access token with each request in bearer authorization header. Each access token will expire after 1 hour or 3600 seconds of inactivity. So once we have this access token, we can implement any request to Cloudways. However, as an example, I'm going to implement this clear app cache and integrate it into the Magento admin panel. And for clear app cache, we have to have server ID and app ID, two required parameters for this app cache purge request. Also, there is a version of this API request URL. It's v1, same as here, v1. And technically what we can do, we can just write v1 here. I think I will go ahead with this part, but preferably it's better to have a chance to change this v1 to v2 on individual basis when, let's say, this request is changed to v2 and access token is still on version 1. So we can update, basically have API as API endpoint, this URL, and v1 can be added when we form a request URL for an individual endpoint. However, yeah, so we need to have two requests. First one is access token request and second is clear app cache. And in order to do this, I'm going to create a service class that is going to be called Cloudways API. And this service class will have two methods. Get authorization token method and public function make API request method. And this API request should return or may return an array, but in our case I will implement that it should return an array. So get authorization token is a method responsible for retrieving a token, and make API request is a method responsible for allowing us to send a request to a specified endpoint method or HTTP method or request method, and body that we will provide as a third optional argument of make API request. So what we have to do? We have to use this config and retrieve API endpoint. We have to use get API key and get email methods in the Cloudways API class, and we can send a request to get authorization token. So let me inject dependencies. Here I need two dependencies. These are two classes that we've just created. First one is curl, and second one is configuration or config. And with these two methods or dependencies, I can first use, I have to import these classes. Get API endpoint, and here I will provide OAuth token part of the endpoint. Moreover, I will use v1, and if I use v1, then I have to get back to this API endpoint and delete v1 from here. It would be more logical. And I have to form request body, also known as data, with email, and I will use this email from configuration, and API key, this config get API key, two fields or parameters, email and API key, that are required for generating an access token. Okay, I have URL data. Finally, I need to provide headers application JSON and accept. It wouldn't be surprise application JSON. So I send JSON and I expect JSON as a response. And here we can call our second dependency, curl execute, with the method with URL method that is post headers and data. And as a result, if we have access token, we retrieve it access token. If not, let's throw new localized exception, failed to get an authorization token from Cloudways. From Cloudways API. And this method, once executed, it has to retrieve access token, and this access token can then be used with any API request that we will be sending with the help of make API request method. So let's go ahead and use config endpoint. And what we can do here, we can call curl, execute, we can provide URL, method, headers that we have to prepare, and data. And for the headers, here is an interesting part. We have to provide authorization bearer authorization, where we will pass authorization token that can also throw an exception. And two headers that I would like to get is content type, a type of request body that we sent is JSON, and a response that we accept response in JSON. And here is how Cloudways API class can be implemented with two public methods, get authorization token and make API request, that can be used in other classes that, or services that we are going to implement in order to integrate our Cloudways API with Magento. Our next step would be creation of a PHP class called clear cache service, and this class is going to be responsible for clearing cache, triggering API endpoint up cache purge in order to clear cache via Cloudways API. So for this I will create a execute method, and here I will need two dependencies. Construct private read-only curl, so I can make not even a curl but Cloudways API. And I would need to have config, so I can get access to configuration values for accessing server ID and app ID. For the endpoint, I am going to use v1 app cache purge. Similar to get authorization token, v1 or auth access token. And I have to have /. This is going to be a post request, and finally I have to pass request data that we are going to provide with the server ID, and this value is going to be retrieved from configuration. I have to import this class, get server ID and app ID, get app ID. As a result, this URL will give us a response with status and operation ID. What I need to do, I have to check whether a response status is not empty and a response status equal true. In this way we can say that our operation is successful and we successfully purged application cache. Let's add some PHP docs, and we can use this clear cache service class somewhere in the action controller and trigger it when a user will clear cache button from admin somewhere like cache management page. So let's go ahead and create this admin controller that is going to be located inside controller admin HTML Cloudways, and we will call our controller clear cache. This controller has to extend action from Magento backend app action. We need to use construct method and call parent construct method construct and pass context. And private read only clear cache service where we will implement execute method that should return a response interface and inside we are going to be calling a cache service method execute, and we will check if we have result or the result is true. Then we can call message manager, add success message, and say Cloudways cache cleared successfully, or else this message manager add error message method where we will say failed to clear Cloudways cache. All this has to be wrapped into try catch because execute method can throw an exception, localized exception, and inside catch we can use add error message, exception, get message, and since our exception is a localized exception, we can safely render and show a message to admin user. And finally, we will return a redirect to admin HTML cache page. And I have to import this class. And this should be action. This should be backend action. So context dependency is Magento backend app action context. And this is how our action controller can look like when processing a request from admin user. Basically when admin user clicks a clear cache button. For this action controller to work, we have to add configuration file inside etc admin HTML, and we have to provide routes.xml configuration file where we will specify admin router, admin HTML route, and our name of the module, Magento Cloudways API, and it has to be executed before Magento backend. For the configuration settings that we have inside the config XML, we have to provide system XML file as part of this extension that will allow admin user to change these 5 configuration settings. For this, let's go ahead and create system.xml file that will hold all our configuration fields. I'm going to create a new tab called Magento. I will provide translate label and sort order 10, and we'll say Magento as a tab. So this tab is going to be used inside section Magento Cloudways API. We are going to have a label and we will translate it. Type text, sort order 10, show in default 1, show in website 1, show in store 1. Inside section we will provide a label Cloudways API settings. We will provide a tab ID under which we are going to render the section, so it's going to be Magento. A resource, this is ACL resource Magento Cloudways API config, and we are going to create acl.xml file. And groups. We're going to have a single group called settings with a translated label, type text, sort order 10, and we can copy all these 3 attributes from a section. But let's change show in website 0 and show in store 0. So show in default is equals 1. Inside the group, let's have a labels called settings, and then fields that we're going to give admin user to change as part of our configuration settings. So first field is email. It's a required field that we have to provide in order to start using our integration. Inside field, let's add label, email, and comment. Let's say email address you use to access Cloudways platform. And let's copy fields, email field to have API key, generated on API section. sort order 20, show in default 1, show in store 0, and show in website 0, in store 0. It's API key, server ID, server ID label, sort order 30, then app ID, let's remove comment, and API endpoint. Specify the Cloudways API endpoint, and default is the one that we set here. Default is this one, API endpoint, and sort order 40. Again, show in default 1, show in website 0, show in store 0. And this is our configuration settings. However, we are missing acl.xml file that will give us access to our configuration, or restrict access to our configuration tab. So for this we have to provide ACL resources, resource ID, Magento backend, admin, and resource, Mage Mastery, Cloudways API, config, title is going to be Cloudways API, translate true, and sort order 10. And this ID of the resource should match the ID that we provide inside the resource XML node in the system.xml configuration file. In this way you can see the settings as an admin user, and you can manage access to the settings when creating new groups for admin users or user roles. And I would like to provide access to a button. In order to add a new button for the cache management page, I'm going to create a plugin, and this plugin is going to be called Clear Cache Button plugin. And the only responsibility of this plugin going to be before set layout plugin for the cache subject and layout interface. Let's import class. This is a backend block cache, and here I'm going to use a dependency public function construct private read only, a dependency to a class that is going to be responsible for adding a new button for the cache block. And I have to create this class. It's going to be a service called clear cache button service with the method execute, public function execute. Here we have cache argument from backend. And inside I can call add button and provide button ID, let's say Cloudways clear cache. Then I need to provide a label. I need to provide on click, and I need to provide a CSS class. I'm going to use existing CSS class, Flash Magento Cache, that is available as part of Magento backend module. So for the label, I need to inject dependency public function construct private read only. I need to inject two dependencies, URL interface in order to generate URL to our action controller, and escaper. So I can escape label that I'm going to provide here. This escaper escape HTML and label clear Cloudways cache. The first thing that I would like to do, and second, it's a printf function that will call setLocation JavaScript function, and here I will provide URL with the help of URL class. Get URL admin HTML Cloudways clear cache. Clear cache is the name of our controller. Cloudways and clear cache is a location where we have our action controller responsible for performing this operation. And also I have to use escaper dependency to escape URL for the setLocation method. Let's add some PHP docs and dependency to this escaper. Alright, so for this plugin to be triggered, I need to create di.xml file. And inside this file, I have to refer to Magento backend block cache, and I have to provide name of a plugin, cache button plugin, and the type of this plugin, it's a name of this PHP class, clear cache button plugin. I have to import the class and paste it here. And in this way, when this block is going to be instantiated, and before set layout method is triggered, we are going to execute our service cache button, clear cache button service that will trigger cache add button method and add a button before triggering set layout method from the cache PHP class, this cache PHP class. And probably the only thing we have to do in order to make this work, we have to run bin Magento module enable Mage Mastery Cloudways API I also have a typo here on click instead of on leak. And bin Magento setup upgrade, so this module is installed in the Magento 2 application. Under cache management page, we have a new button, rendered clear Cloudways cache. And if we click this button, we can see that we have our localized exception message shown. And if we navigate to configuration, we can see Image Mastery Cloudways API settings with all settings that we prepared in our extension. In order to get API key, we have to navigate to unify.cloudways.com/API, and there is a section of API secret keys where we can generate or regenerate API key that we can use to insert into our Cloudways API extension. Next, when we navigate to a particular server, in the URL we can copy server ID that we can paste again into the configuration part of our extension. Same for the application ID. When we navigate to applications, and in the URL we can copy this app ID that we can insert into the configuration. And after clicking Save Config and refreshing the cache, under cache management page, we can get our fields pre-populated, and as a result, when we click Clear Cloudways Cache, we can successfully connect through Cloudways API and clear Cloudways cache directly from Magento cache management page.